They said he was 12 years old, a boy from the Bronx, with a left arm that looked unstoppable. In the summer of 2001, his name was everywhere. Danny Almonte, the kid who threw a perfect game on national TV, the kid who struck out batter after batter after batter, the kid they nicknamed the Little Unit. He looked like the kind of fairy tale sports are built on, a small kid from New York City smiling shyly on camera, then walking to the mound and making other kids look helpless. It was dominance so shocking that parents and fans in Williamsport started whispering, was this boy really 12 years old, or was he something else? The numbers told their own story, a perfect game in the Little League World Series, 62 strikeouts across just 6 games, batters so overwhelmed they would walk back to the dugout shaking their heads in disbelief. He wasn't just good, he looked untouchable. And for a brief moment, America fell in love with him. He was on ESPN. He was on the front page of newspapers. Kids lined up for autographs. Teammates called him their hero. The Bronx finally had a sports legend it could call its own. But legends don't last when they're built on lies, because Danny Almonte wasn't 12, he was 14, and when the truth came out, everything collapsed. The trophies, the banners, the highlights erased. His coach banned for life, his parents disgraced, and Danny himself, a boy who never asked for the lie, branded forever as a fraud. Think about that for a second. He didn't forge the birth certificate, he didn't change the paperwork. He was just a kid, a pawn in a game adults were willing to cheat to win. But when the scandal broke, it wasn't the adults who became the face of it. It was Danny, the boy whose face was splashed across every TV screen, the boy America pointed at and said, he was too good to be true. And that's how Danny Almonte's name entered sports history, not as a phenom, not as a champion, but as a fraud. America told itself a story to make it easier to move on. This was one kid, one scandal, one mistake that would never happen again. But here's the truth. Danny Almonte wasn't the beginning, and he wasn't the end. Because once you pull at this thread, the entire world of sports starts to unravel. It isn't just one boy in the Bronx. It isn't just one coach with a forged document. It's a pattern, a global system of lies. In Africa, entire national soccer teams have been banned when bone scans revealed their teenage stars were really grown men. Some of those so-called U17 prodigies were discovered to already have children of their own. In the Dominican Republic, Major League Baseball has seen teenage prospects exposed for falsifying documents, contracts worth millions torn apart, athletes forced to admit they were 2, 3, even 4 years older than they claimed. And in basketball, the fraud isn't hidden at all. It's celebrated. Kids repeat grades. They reclassify. They manipulate their ages in plain sight, while coaches, scouts, and even leagues encourage it. Think about that. A little leaguer gets destroyed in the media. But billion-dollar leagues, they profit from the illusion of youth, because this isn't just about athletes lying, it's about parents who see their children as investments, agents who pocket bigger cuts if the kid looks younger, governments willing to forge birth certificates for national pride, and billion-dollar leagues that quietly benefit from the myth of the teenage prodigy. The truth is darker than anyone wants to admit. Fraud doesn't just slip through the cracks, fraud is baked into the system. It's profitable, it's marketable, and most of all, it sells, because we love the story of the kid who dominates against all odds. We want to believe in the 15-year-old phenom, the 16-year-old superstar, the youngest ever headline that makes history feel magical. But if the birth certificate is fake, the dream is fake. And if the dream is fake, how much of sports is real at all? This is not one scandal, it's not one country, it's not one league. This is the age fraud conspiracy. And to understand how deep this lie goes, we have to start with the sport where the fraud became an epidemic: soccer. Soccer is the world's game. Billions of fans, millions of kids chasing the dream, but beneath the glory, one of the sport's darkest secrets has become an epidemic. Age fraud. It isn't new, and it isn't rare. It's been happening for decades, and nowhere has it been more blatant than in youth soccer. In 2009, Nigeria's under-17 team, the Golden Eaglets, was preparing to defend its World Cup title. But before the tournament began, something shocking happened. 15 players failed MRI wrist scans, tests designed to detect whether their bones matched their reported ages. 15 on one team. It was supposed to be a squad of teenagers, but in reality, it looked more like a squad of men. And Nigeria wasn't alone. In 2019, Guinea's entire under-17 team was banned from competition. Why? Because multiple players were caught using forged documents, and these weren't isolated scandals. Cameroon, Ghana, the Congo. Year after year, investigations reveal players competing years older than their paperwork claimed. It's so widespread that FIFA itself has called age fraud in youth soccer an epidemic. So, how does it happen? It starts with something simple: a birth certificate, or in some cases, the lack of one. In countries where record keeping is weak, a single forged document can transform a 21-year-old into a 17-year-old overnight, and the incentives are massive. Because in youth soccer, the younger you are, the more valuable you look. A 17-year-old dominating on the field? That's expected. But a 17-year-old pretending to be 14? That looks like the next Messi. The system rewards the fraud. Scouts get credit for discovering once-in-a-lifetime talents. Agents get paid more when their players sign big contracts. And federations, they get the glory of winning tournaments with teenagers who are really adults. The players themselves, they're often just following orders. Some are told to lie about their ages from the very beginning. Others have their paperwork handled by corrupt officials with no say in the matter, and for many of them, it's survival. In parts of Africa, soccer isn't just a sport, it's the only way out of poverty, and if shaving a few years off your age means a shot at a contract, families are willing to risk everything. But the fraud comes with consequences. Younger players, the real 15 and 16-year-olds, lose opportunities because they're competing against men. Development gets distorted, entire generations of talent are stunted, and when the truth comes out, it's the athletes who carry the shame, not the federations, not the agents, the kids, just like Danny Almonte. The technology to fight it exists: MRI wrist scans, biometric testing, even DNA verification. But here's the problem: enforcement isn't consistent. Federations choose when and how to test, and in some cases, who even gets tested at all? Think about that. The people in charge of enforcing the rules are often the same people benefiting from breaking them, and that's the real conspiracy. It isn't just that players lie, it's that the system lets them. Soccer has shown us what happens when age fraud becomes an epidemic. Teams banned, tournaments tainted, dreams destroyed. But soccer is just one chapter, because where the glory of a World Cup fuels fraud, the promise of millions in contracts takes it to another level, and no sport shows that more clearly than baseball. If soccer showed us how age fraud becomes an epidemic, baseball showed us how it becomes an industry. Major League Baseball has built an empire on young talent from Latin America, and no country has been more important than the Dominican Republic. Today, more than 25% of all MLB players are Dominican. It's a pipeline, a factory, and at the heart of it is a number that changes everything: 16. Because at 16 years old, a prospect can sign his first professional contract. That's the line. That's the age every kid in the Dominican dreams of reaching. But here's the catch: 16 on paper doesn't always mean 16 in reality. The fraud works like this: a kid is born in a poor neighborhood in Santo Domingo, no birth certificate, no paperwork. When he starts showing talent, an agent steps in, and suddenly, that boy's official birthday gets moved forward by 2, sometimes 3 years. A 19-year-old becomes 16 again, and on the field, the difference is massive because a 19-year-old throwing 95 looks like the second coming of Pedro Martinez, if you believe he's only 16. A grown man dominating teenagers becomes a once-in-a-generation phenom, and that illusion is worth millions. The stories are everywhere. Miguel Tejada, former MVP, admitted years later that he was actually 2 years older than listed. Fausto Carmona, an all-star pitcher who wasn't Fausto Carmona at all, his real name was Roberto Hernandez, and his real age? Older than anyone thought. Juan Carlos Oviedo, known in the big leagues as Leo Nunez, closer for the Marlins, until one day his entire career was revealed to be based on a fake identity. And it doesn't stop. As recently as 2024, the Padres signed a 14-year-old Dominican prodigy named Cesar Altagracia, only to discover he was 19. Over and over again, baseball has been forced to admit the truth: the phenoms weren't what they seemed. MLB has tried to fight it. At one point, they even experimented with DNA testing, but it didn't last. The program was scrapped after backlash over privacy concerns, and quietly, the problem never really went away, because deep down, MLB benefits from the fraud. The illusion of a 16-year-old prodigy sells tickets, it sells jerseys, it sells hope, and for the league, hope is $1 billion product. And then there are the rumors no one wants to touch: Albert Pujols, one of the greatest hitters in baseball history. From the moment he arrived in the majors, whispers followed him. Was he really the age he claimed, or was his story just another illusion? Pujols has always denied the rumors, and nothing has ever been proven, but the whispers have never gone away. And here's the conspiracy theory: if a Hall of Famer was misaged, if Major League Baseball knew, Would they ever admit it, or would they bury the truth to protect one of the game's biggest stars? Baseball shows us what happens when fraud isn't just survival, but profit. An entire industry built on fake paperwork, fake ages, and real money. And if MLB, a billion-dollar league, can look the other way, what does that say about the rest of sports? Because the truth is, baseball isn't alone. Basketball has its own problem, and unlike baseball, it isn't hidden at all. Baseball showed us what happens when money fuels fraud. But basketball takes it to another level. Because in this sport, age fraud isn't just whispered about, it's woven into the culture. And sometimes it doesn't even try to hide. Remember Albert Pujols, the whispers that he wasn't the age he claimed, whispers that still follow him today? Basketball has its own version of that story. And this time, it isn't whispers, it's happening right in front of us. Enter Common Malawach. 7 foot 2 from South Sudan, drafted in the top 5 of the 2025 NBA draft. On paper, he's just 18 years old, and with the size, polish, and presence of a seasoned pro. And that's where the whispers begin. Because in South Sudan, record keeping is weak, birth certificates aren't always reliable. So when Malawak dominated international competition at just 17, fans online started asking the question out loud, was he really that young? Or was the NBA selling us another fairy tale? No proof, no hard evidence, but the speculation refuses to die, because Malawak already looks too good to be true. And he's not the first. Thon Maker entered the NBA in 2016, listed at 19, but almost immediately Reddit threads and sports forums lit up with memes. High school classmates claimed he was years older. Photos of him at tournaments from a decade earlier started circulating. Fans joked that Thon wasn't 19, he was 23 or 25 or even older. Nothing was ever proven, but the damage was done. Thon Maker wasn't just a player anymore, he was a meme, the face of basketball's age fraud conspiracy. And then there's Serge Ibaka, officially born in 1989, but throughout his career, whispers followed him, whispers that his paperwork had been adjusted long before he reached the NBA. Again, no proof. But in the world of basketball, the line between truth and story has always been blurry. And then there's the biggest theory of all, Yao Ming, not just misaged, but manufactured. The rumor goes like this, that Yao was the product of a Chinese government program engineered from birth to become the country's first basketball superstar. His parents were both athletes, his growth, his development, guided. Even his age, some say it was adjusted to fit the perfect narrative. Was it true? Probably not. But the fact that people believe it, that it circulates online decades later, shows just how deep the mistrust runs. Because in basketball, every prodigy feels like they come with an asterisk. And here's the craziest part. In America, basketball doesn't even need fake documents. It has something else. A loophole hiding in plain sight. Reclass. Kids repeat grades in middle school. They start high school a year older. They look bigger, stronger, more dominant than their peers, and suddenly, they're the next LeBron. The youngest ever phenom, except they aren't younger at all. They're older. Andre Drummond reclassed, OJ Mayo reclassed, dozens of today's stars manipulated the system, and nobody calls it fraud, because in the USA, it isn't fraud, it's strategy. But think about what that means. An entire generation of basketball players, manufactured, not naturally developed, not authentically competing, but engineered to look like prodigies, to sell the story of the youngest ever. The real losers, the kids who don't reclass, the ones who stay on their natural timeline and suddenly look small, underdeveloped, and invisible to scouts. For them, the dream ends early, not because they weren't good enough, but because the system was rigged. Basketball's silent problem isn't really silent, it's celebrated, it's normalized, it's hiding in plain sight. And if fans are already suspicious about Malawak, about Maker, about Ibaka, what does that say about the next wave of once-in-a-lifetime stars? Because when every prodigy feels like a lie, what happens to the truth? And more importantly, who actually benefits from keeping the lie alive? By now, we've seen the scandals, Danny Almonte in Little League, entire African soccer teams banned, Dominican prospects exposed, basketball prodigies questioned. But here's the real question, why does it keep happening? It starts with survival. In the Dominican Republic, in West Africa, in poor corners of China, sports aren't hobbies, they're lifelines. For families with nothing, a single child making it pro can change everything. One contract can buy a house, feed a family, lift generations out of poverty. So when you ask why parents allow their kids to lie about their age, the answer is simple. It doesn't feel like lying. It feels like survival. It starts with survival. Think about it. If you had nothing and you were told your son could look like a prodigy if his birth date was changed by 2 years, would you say no, or would you see it as his one shot at a future? And that's where the parents come in. In the US, they push their kids to reclass in middle school, hold them back in 8th grade, make them bigger, stronger, older by the time high school scouts come around. In other countries, they sign off on forged documents. They let their kids become younger on paper because they know how the game works. But parents aren't the only ones pulling strings. There's an entire network of middlemen profiting from this fraud. In the Dominican, they're called buscones, private trainers who recruit kids as young as 12. They feed them, house them, promise them a future, and when the kid signs $1 million contract, the buscon takes his cut. In that system, honesty doesn't make money, illusion does. If a 19-year-old looks 16, the signing bonus doubles. If a player is marketed as the next teenage phenom, the scout looks smarter, the agent gets richer, and the league gets its headline. And it's not just baseball. In basketball, AAU coaches and prep school handlers play the same game. They convince families to hold kids back, reclassify them, stretch their hype across another year. And when the player makes it, those coaches cash in with influence, kickbacks, and reputation. But here's the darkest truth of all. It's not just families or agents, the leagues themselves benefit. Major League Baseball thrives on the illusion of the 16-year-old prodigy. The NBA markets the youngest MVP ever. FIFA hypes teen prodigies as the future of the game. Why? Because youth sells, fans believe, sponsors buy in, and media companies push the fairy tale. So ask yourself, if the lie creates billions in profit, why would anyone want to stop it? And that's the cruel part. The kids take the risk, the kids take the shame. If they succeed, they're celebrated as legends. If they're exposed, they're branded as frauds. But the system always wins because the fraud was never about truth. It was always about selling the illusion of youth. This is why it happens, not because a few kids decided to cheat, but because the entire system is built to reward it. And when you realize the leagues profit just as much as the players, the next question becomes unavoidable. If the fraud is built into the system, who's covering it up? Here's the question no one asks. If age fraud is so widespread, why hasn't it been stopped? Because the truth is, the people in charge don't actually want to stop it. Start with Little League Baseball. When Danny Almonte's lie was exposed, they acted like it was one scandal, one coach, one bad apple. They stripped wins. They banned his coach for life. They made Danny the villain. But what they didn't admit, the rumors were there for months. Parents raised concerns. Rival coaches questioned his age. Little League ignored it until the media forced their hand. It wasn't about protecting kids. It was about protecting their brand. And FIFA? They've been calling age fraud an epidemic for decades, but when scandals erupt, Nigeria, Guinea, Cameroon, it's the kids who get punished, not the federations, not the officials. FIFA has the tools, MRI wrist scans, DNA testing, biometric checks, but enforcement is inconsistent. Sometimes entire squads are banned, other times players just slip through. Ask yourself why? Because federations are powerful and FIFA needs them more than it needs the truth. Major League Baseball, same story. After scandal in the Dominican Republic, MLB experimented with DNA testing. Finally, a solution, a way to stop the fraud, but it didn't last. The program was quietly scrapped. They blamed privacy concerns. They blamed pushback from families. But the real reason? They were afraid of what they might find. Because what happens if DNA tests reveal that dozens of prospects are lying? That the billion-dollar pipeline is built on fraud? MLB didn't want those headlines, so they killed the program, and the fraud continued. And then there's basketball. Here, fraud isn't hidden, it's normalized, it's celebrated. Reclass isn't called cheating, it's called strategy. AAU coaches brag about holding kids back. Prep schools build their programs around it. And the NBA, they profit from the results. The youngest MVP ever. The teenage prodigy. These headlines fuel hype. They sell tickets. They sell jerseys. They sell stories. So why would the NBA ever call it fraud when it's their best marketing tool? That's the conspiracy no one says out loud. The fraud doesn't survive in spite of the system. It survives because of the system. Fraud sells. Fraud creates heroes. Fraud keeps money flowing. And when fraud is profitable, covering it up becomes policy. Think back to Danny Almonte. He didn't forge documents. He didn't invent the lie. The adults did, but when it collapsed, Danny's face was the one on every headline. Danny's name became the fraud. That's how it always works. The kids take the blame. The institutions walk away clean. So if the leagues won't stop it, well, what will? Technology, biometrics, DNA tests. But technology doesn't just reveal fraud. It creates new ways to manipulate it, and that's the scariest part, because the future of sports might not be about exposing lies, but about engineering the next one. If the leagues won't stop fraud, maybe technology will. Over the last 2 decades, new tools have been introduced to catch cheaters: MRI scans, DNA testing, biometric tracking, even blockchain IDs. For the first time, it looked like the truth might finally win. Start with MRI bone scans. FIFA has used them for years. On paper, they work. A wrist scan can reveal if a player's growth plates are still open. If they're closed, that player isn't a teenager anymore. But here's the problem: the scans aren't perfect, and federations can choose when or if to use them, which means the test doesn't kill fraud, it just creates another way to manipulate it. Then there's biometrics, fingerprints, retinal scans, DNA samples. These tools can expose fake identities instantly. In theory, every player could have a digital profile that follows them from childhood to the pros, but in practice, they raise even bigger questions. Who controls the data? Who has access? And what happens when a $1 billion league decides to look the other way? Some experts believe the future is blockchain, a digital birth certificate that can't be forged, a permanent record tied to each athlete. Sounds like the perfect solution. But think about it. If federations are already corrupt, what stops them from corrupting the system at the source? A lie entered into the blockchain is still a lie, it just looks more official. And here's where it gets darker, because technology doesn't just expose fraud, it creates new ways to commit it: performance science, HGH, blood spinning, stem cell therapy. If yesterday's fraud was shaving 2 years off your age, tomorrow's fraud might be engineering the perfect body. And then there's the final frontier: gene editing. Imagine a player literally built in a lab, height predetermined, muscles engineered, bones reinforced. Not a prodigy, not a miracle, but a product. Would fans care? Would leagues admit it? Or would they sell the lie the same way they always have? Age fraud was never just about lying, it was about control, about manufacturing heroes, about protecting billion-dollar illusions. And the future doesn't look like the end of that story, it looks like the next chapter. Because if sports are already filled with fake ages, what happens when the players themselves are fake too? This was never just about a forged birth certificate, never just about one kid in the Bronx, or one team in Nigeria, or one prospect in the Dominican. This is about trust, because when the foundation of sport is fake, everything built on top of it starts to crumble. Sports sell us the dream of purity, the young phenom, the prodigy against all odds, the miracle season, but peel back the layers, and what you find isn't purity, it's marketing, it's manipulation, it's illusion. And if the lies are this deep today, what happens tomorrow? When players aren't just misaged, but manufactured? When the next prodigy isn't discovered, but designed? Will we still call it sport, or will it be something else entirely? So here's the question to sit with. If the story is fake, if the age is fake, if the body is fake, then what exactly are we cheering for? If you're still here, you already know the answer. You see more than the average fan, you see the cracks in the system, and that makes you part of the few. So don't stop here. Subscribe, comment, share this, because the more people who know, the harder it becomes for the leagues to keep selling the lie. And remember, this wasn't the end of the story, this was only the beginning.